From somewhere in beautiful downtown Burbank, NBC once more tries to prevent...
What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
Nothing upsets a pickle lover more than a dull, soggy pickle.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Pickle lovers always insist on the proud pickle. Heinz. No compromise, no shortcuts, no soggy pickle. Heinz stops at nothing to give you a pickle that tastes the way no other pickle does. Crisp, full-bodied, savory. That's what makes Heinz the proud pickle. If you were the best tasting pickle, wouldn't you be proud?
We welcome our audience member back to yet another episode of Notes from an Arsonist. Or is it Notes from an Artist, Dave?
Don't burn me up.
That was unscripted, folks.
But we will flame out if we keep this up.
Oh, my goodness. Borscht Bell.
We need a good match. And this show's got to be a little lighter than the rest.
Oh, vey. I'm your host, Tom Semioli. My co-host has been called many things over the years, most of which I cannot repeat on this platform without the written consent of Major League Baseball.
That's it! Holy cow, what a way to end it!
David, please greet our audience member.
Hey, Karen.
Sound like a jazz cat there. Well, David, if you listen to the show, and obviously you do, it's quite evident that you and I are voracious readers, and by voracious, I mean ravenous, hungry, insatiable, big, huge readers. And
we're
writers. We enjoy talking to our fellow authors, and it's not unusual for us to create multiple episodes of books we really feel are important. Remember, we did 4 episodes with Kurt Bianchi, Elegant People, The History of Weather Report, and that is a must-read for all jazz and world music fans. We've had TV historian John Burlingame on the show a few times to discuss his books, which we highly recommend. So if you are fans of our podcast, then you should go search out Kurt Bianchi and John Burlingame. Burlingame. Which brings us to author and musician Bob Gluck. His new book is entitled Pat Metheny, Stories Beyond Words. And it is out now on Chicago University Press, or is it? That's University of Chicago.
Yes.
All right. Whichever way you look at it, David, it has something to do with Chicago.
It's the Bears.
It's the Bears. And the first place Chicago Cubs. Joe Gagliardo, shout out to you, and Christine Cutt.
But you got slaughtered by the Yankees a couple of days ago.
Yeah, but they came back and beat
11-0.
All right. Boy, see that? This is part 2 of our conversation with Bob, so check out part 1. Now, Bob's book on Pat Metheny includes interviews with some of Pat's collaborators over the past 50 years. It contains musical examples written in notation for you students and players. Real valuable content, and Bob also gives the reader historical perspective on Pat's work. And speaking of historical perspective, David, today we are taping this on 13 July, which is the 40th anniversary of Live Aid, which happened in 1985. And I was watching clips, and I didn't realize, or I didn't remember, that Pat Metheny appeared at Live Aid with Carlos Santana.
I had no idea.
All right, well, check that out. There's going to be all sorts of retrospectives on today. Hard to believe, Pat has been on the bandstand and in the studio for 50 years. He is an elder statesman of modern jazz, and he maintains his youthful exuberance on record and on stage. David, what can we expect in this episode?
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
The thing that I find most interesting is our digressions got pretty long-winded. We speak about the book and all, but it's more about what Pat Metheny grew up with, what he was listening to. We spend a lot of time talking about these great musicians who preceded him. Everything from the Electric Miles to Weather Report to Chick Corea, and we talk a little about Moog synthesizers and the importance that keyboard players had in terms of, as you and I were talking about, you need a degree in engineering to be able to play the music, because it was no longer just chops on a piano. It was all this other electronic stuff.
Absolutely so. And as always, after every show, we will have a playlist, which we'll explain after we get rid of Bob Gluck.
I don't want to die, oh, please. I don't want to die, oh, please. Oh, don't make me burn out.
That's right, but there is one more Glucking afterwards. In other words, this was a three-parter.
Oh, it's going to be 3 parts, 3 episodes of Gluck. All right, so let's get to episode 2.
Maybe we'll talk about Pat Metheny in this one.
Maybe we will. We'll see what happens. But David, you know, it's time for the plug.
Okay.
So I must be plugged here. Notes from an Artist can be heard live on internet radio every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern on www.cygnusradio.com on the browser of your choice. David, how do you spell the word Cygnus?
Cyngus.
Cygnus. Cygnus.
I did that. Cygnus.
You went Cyngus.
Did I really?
Yeah, listen to it on the playback.
Well, I'm dyslexic, so I don't believe in dog.
You can also download the Cygnus Radio app. If you know how to spell Cygnus, you can actually download the Cygnus Radio app on the computer or mobile device of your choice. It's probably an
Right?
iPhone.
Yeah, that's an easy word for you.
Yeah, and you have freedom of choice when it comes to Notes from an Artist. David, you can listen on your browser or on your app. Did you know, David, that Notes from an Artist podcast is streaming right now on Apple, Amazon, Buzzsprout, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are propagated?
No, I had no idea. I thought they used to be potted.
They used to be potted. Listen to Notes from an Artist anytime on your own time. David, let's toot our own horn, even though we are bass players. Did you know, David, and that's a rhetorical question, Notes from an Artist is in the top 10% of all 3.2 million registered podcasts. Congratulations to us, David.
Well, thank you.
Notes from an Artist is heard in 2,063 cities, towns, villages, encampments, gulags, massage parlors, dens of iniquity, condominiums, timeshares, houses of ill repute, brothels, mental institutions, districts, and provinces. Wherever people coagulate, David, Notes from an Artist is there.
Well, I got to tell you, Tom, I know this sounds crazy, but I am told that shepherds around the world tune in to Notes from an Artist.
Look at that.
Ah, yes. Shepherds.
Visit Notes from an Artist on our YouTube page, David. We have interviews from some of our more high-profile guests, including Ron Carter, Bill Wyman, Steve Vai, Joe Lynn Turner, he has 3 names like you, Richard Thompson, Jaw Wobble, Phil Manzanera, Lenny Kaye, Glenn Matlock of the Sex Pistolas, Michael DeBar, and your favorite guest, the always cheerful Ian Anderson. So check out our YouTube page.
By the way, Tom, you were talking about being July 13th. Why not suggest that our listeners listen to the Michael DeBar?
That's right, he was with Power Station.
Exactly, and he tells a great story about that in our podcast.
That's right. So check out our interview with Michael DeBar. That is on our podcast, wherever podcasts are postulated. Wasn't Phil Manzanera on stage with someone I know Roxy. No, that's right. Brian Ferry was on as a solo artist with Marcus Miller on bass and with David Gilmour on guitar.
And David, of course, is good buddies with Phil, so there you go.
There you go. So that's close enough. And David, you can keep up with Notes from an Artist on our website, www.notesfromanartist.com, and learn about our artistic curations platform, where we create art and music for social and corporate events. How about that?
Wow. I didn't even know we were that cool.
We were that cool. And we also do antisocial events as well.
Well, that's true.
David and I are band leaders, so check out our music. Lots of cool stuff and links on notesfromanartist.com. So troll that internet to our audience member. Okay, let's bring him in. Bob Gluck. You start off the book with a conversation with your mother when she says, "What is it? It ain't jazz and ain't rock." And you quote Metheny in the book as referring to jazz as a verb, which is very prescient. I mean, I heard Pat Metheny on his first record, obviously, as most people did, Bright Size Life. And it was interesting because I didn't know what I was hearing at first. I knew it was a guitar, obviously, but the tone and the phrasing struck me. And of course, like you mentioned, he was not a shredder. He wasn't a Larry Coryell, John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola. But it was something that was very familiar, even though it was new. And I kind of related almost a little bit. I'm a child of the mid-'70s. Its ambient aesthetic was not unlike what Brian Eno was doing. And I think Bright Size Life is almost in many ways my generation's kind of blue. It was new and familiar at the same time. Now, I went to University of Miami from 79 to 82. Minored in jazz. I didn't spend all my parents' money. And, of course, Pat Metheny was a hero. And, of course, Jocko was at his commercial apex with Weather Report. And I think, actually, the fact that they had become stars pushed the University of Miami to acknowledge the present. They were still stuck in the bebop world.
And Jocko is out of Miami himself.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Jocko and Pat played together in Miami.
Right.
And then later elsewhere, Boston and elsewhere.
Right. That's what attracted a lot of students there. I mean, I started off on classical guitar and moved to bass guitar because I wanted to meet girls. And David, did you meet girls playing bass?
Yes, I met one or two.
In the criminal justice system, sexually based offenses are considered especially heinous. In New York City, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Special Victims Unit. These are their stories.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
But it's interesting, you say in the book Bright Size Live introduce his concept of composing structures that facilitate improvisation, unconstrained by the harmonic guardrails of bebop. And that's exactly what it is.
You're right. I completely agree. I didn't take very careful note of Bright Side Life when it came out, and it wasn't until years later. I first really noticed Pat around 1983.
Right, in the book.
81, 82, 83, that when he was playing with some of Ornette Seidman and his band, and Michael Brecker, and then with the Pat Metheny group, did Off Ramp, and I went to see also a very loud concert outdoors of that band, I think right before or right after First Circle. And I want to note about, in terms of the ambience question, I agree with you about that general aesthetic. And in part, that's part of what Manfred Eicher was aiming for in his label. And that Pat ended up being on that label was really a function of Gary Burton. And a lot of the ideas that were leading to maybe not the ambient part, but the structural parts really come from Steve Swallow, who was playing with Gary Burton. Right. And then Pat joins the band. So what I noticed when I was in Philadelphia in this outdoor place was this really kind of interesting, confusing acoustics. For one thing, it was loud and there were a lot of speakers. But I had the sense that I didn't understand until I started working on the book that Pat's whole idea was of having really like sound that is going to come from all directions. And through multiple delays to different degrees, right? Slightly different delays.
Right. Yeah, the three speakers you were mentioning. Yeah.
Right. And you could hear that And I was sitting way out in this outdoor arena, and you'd think you wouldn't be able to tell that, but it influenced the overall sound. So this notion of ambience in general is definitely very Pat. The thing that really interested me, though, really was about the structure idea. The structure idea was really aligns with, the title of the book is Stories Beyond Words. Pat likes to use metaphors relating to storytelling regarding his playing and his music, whether it's his compositions or it's his soloing, and his soloing really emerges out of the way he structures his compositions, which is partly why he likes to play largely his own music. He likes to have settings that are designed for the way in which he likes to improvise. So along the lines of the kind of story metaphor, unlike, it's not a new metaphor in jazz. Plenty of people over history have used it. I'm not quite sure what they mean often, but what I mean when I'm talking about Pat's music. And that is that if you treat the word story as a metaphor, and I use the word narrative, a narrative arc is the expression that I really like. A narrative arc can be one note, it can be a phrase, it can be a cycle, a harmonic cycle. It can be anything, and it starts somewhere and it carries you along and along and along and along and along and then puts you down. And it's like going to a great film where it grabs you, you can't quite tell where it's going, but it holds you and takes you to the end, and then you feel like you've gone through some complete kind of experience, and that's what a good story does. The structural device was really, you found here and there in jazz settings. There's a Dizzy Gillespie tune, Cone Alma, Blue and Green, whether you want to credit that to Bill Evans or to Miles Davis or to some combination. And they're all ones in which there are bass lines that go small steps down and up, and they just keep moving step by step by step by step by step. And the simple chords or triads that are juxtaposed with them change really subtly to adjust to the movement of the bass line. And what I came to realize was that that's actually Paul McCartney's idea.
Right. You mentioned that, right? The Beatles analogy,
And so if anybody has a chance to watch the interview series of the interviews with Paul McCartney. I think McCartney 1, 2, 3.
Right. Yeah, it's fabulous.
It's absolutely fabulous and fascinating. I never really appreciated him and understood him as a musician, aside from being a wonderful melodicist, until I heard him talking. And he was talking about as a teenager discovering contrary motion, like the bass going one way and the melody going the other way. It was very sophisticated, but when I started putting together McCartney and other Beatles tunes, and then some by other rock bands of the same time, like Yesterday, the bass line is bum, 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 bum. It's moving stepwise while the melody's going where the melody goes. The glue is in the bass line and its movement, and that's what carries you through, and that really it makes the harmony do something different than if you just had like a 3-chord song. It transforms it. And so Steve Swallow and Gary Burton are scratching their heads about, we're tired of playing bebop tunes. We don't want to play the same cyclical patterns. We want to do something different.
Right, Swallow, you quote Swallow in that, yeah. We're talking about he would have never gone to that chord. You imply, right, is that McCartney and the Beatles they didn't let music theory stand in the way of songwriting, in other words.
But you also have to admit, though, that in the beginning, when the Beatles first started, they were being portrayed as completely illiterate musicians.
Yeah, they were
which
not.
Which was completely untrue. But that was to, I guess, the media wanted to sort of slight them as not being real musicians. And that was a complete lie.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's more about marketing, criticism, and so on, like so many things are. It took Pat to help me fall in love with the Beatles, by the way.
Interesting.
It was the melodicism and realizing that some of that kind of form is what is really like the magic juice that grabs me about some of the best Beatles tunes. So what happens then if you have like form where that's largely about the bass line movement and the chord shifting subtly, what you have is something that on one hand seems static. It's almost like the Brian Eno ambient thing that Tom, you were referring to. On one hand, it's not really going anywhere. And that also takes us back to the Zawinul album. Like, what's so interesting is it seems like it's going nowhere, but it's going everywhere. What that does is that you can have really interesting chord movement, chord changes that emerge out of the implications of that stepwise bass line, and that opens up the field for improvising. One can improvise in really long forms and do it intuitively. So one can shape a solo not because, in terms of its ebbs and flows, and where it gets more energetic and less, and that kind of story-like way of thinking about it there, but it's not because the chord changes are so heavily influencing you. It's that it's just set up to open it up. It's a very different approach than other musicians like Anthony Braxton, who had different kinds of structures. The Miles' band and M1DC, where the Miles Electric Band, well, even the 60s acoustic bands, where it didn't really matter where things started. They could start on with the tune. I've listened to M1DC recordings where you don't even get to the tune for a half hour, and we're still on the same set, same tune, same set. These were different, just very different ideas about how you can open the playing field, in a sense, to be able to improvise wherever your own curiosity takes yourself, listening to yourself, and where the collectivity of your engagement with the other people you're playing with can take you.
Also, from my perspective, the fact that many of those musicians were listening to Stockhausen, Xenakis,
yes,
John Cage, for that matter, Steve Reich. And I think one of the words that immediately comes to mind with Dr. Honoris Causa is tension.
Yes.
It starts with that boom, 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 and then you have, and I don't mean this in a negative way, the electric piano noodling, creating sounds and everything. And I think that's probably the closest of that style of music. Is it was no longer a 1-6-4-5 or a 1-6-2-5 maybe kind of thing. It was, let's stay here but explore sound.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's such a beautiful thing.
Right. And that's how I understand. There's a funny thing about Herbie Hancock, was known as like Mr. Synthesizers. In 1969, there was out in the courtyard of MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, there was a 4 Moog ensemble performance. And I wrote about it in an article about Paul Bley, because Paul Bley had his own sort of electronic period also that I've spent some time paying attention to. But Herbie Hancock, Oscar Peterson was asked to join, and I think he did. Herbie Hancock was asked, and his answer was, I don't know anything about synthesizers, 1969. Now, what I think happened for him and Chick Corea, and they both tell parallel stories. Herbie Hancock's version is that he comes to the studio in 1968 and says, where's the piano? Miles points to what at first was not a Fender Rhodes. It was first
Wurlitzer?
It was first a Wurlitzer, and then became a Fender Rhodes pretty soon. And he went, what's this? What am I going to do with this toy? And then he plays it, and out comes this unfolding sound. And in Chick's case, he joins the band. There's the electric piano, and I don't know, weird, wow. And what they each start doing in their own ways is seeing what they can do with that sound, how you can shape that sound. So for Herbie Hancock, it's the Echoplex, a wah-wah pedal. For Chick Corea, it's a wah-wah pedal. I'm trying to remember what else.
Maestro?
No. Earlier than that. It's a ring modulator, big ring modulator on the electric piano, which the top removed, as was the thing in that day, because the tines would break and you'd have to replace them no matter what was going on. So they each had all this stuff all around the same time, and they're doing sound design. And they're realizing that in a way it's all about sound. it's Herbie who goes there further. Chick had done that really well playing an acoustic piano with Circle and
And don't
playing the
forget, Now He
strings.
Sings,
And
Now He Sobs, which was a magnificent.
yes, absolutely. Yes, that's really a pivotal album. Also, in that same kind of way. And there you have Roy Haynes,
And Miroslav.
and Miroslav Vitous, right? And so they're all like, it's all happening around the same time, and it's all about exploration, and it really is all about sound and how you shape it together. Yeah. So completely agree. That's why I'm so fascinated with that era that I keep going back to it, because there's always more.
Absolutely, I agree. And where you love Crossings, Sextant's the one that really blew me away.
In what way?
The whole sound, the fact that he used an entire side of the record to tell a story, very Miles Davis-like. I found that. Also, Patrick Gleason was no slouch.
So, yes, I mean, the interesting thing about Pat, Pat was an English professor and decides that he's had enough of academia and opens a studio Different Fur. And David Rubinson knows the studio and knows Pat, and, suggests that Herbie Hancock brings some of the raw recordings over from that would become the second side of the LP of Crossings, bring them over, see what he could do with them. And there we are. And Pat is an amazing musician, has incredible ears. The last few years, he's like sort of been reinventing some of the Miles work of that era all over, doing some of it with Benny Maupin, doing it with Michael Shreve and others. I mean, it's really, really interesting. I mean, he's not a spring chicken at this point. Yeah. So this, again, it's like, it really comes into being, it's most apparent on Sextants. On Crossings, it's overdubs. Overdubs of all different kinds, not just the synthesizers. If you look in my M1DC band book, one of Benny Maupin's tunes, I have like a visual diagram, which unfortunately is in black and white there. That is just, I'm drawing different shapes for different kinds of gestures that happen and the patterns that happen. And they involve the added percussion and voices and synthesizers and prototype the Mellotron. And then they go on tour and it's just wild. And they have a quadraphonic sound system, and Fundi is spinning each of the people around the room, and they're hijacking somebody's playing, and it was really an octet.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
I want to interrupt you just for a second.
No.
This is going so well, and if you have the time, I'd like to turn this into a two-parter, so if you can stay on with us.
Sure.
We really haven't hit the Pat Metheny thing, but I think this is a wonderful preamble to that, though, because this is what he was listening to. This is where everything was starting to come together. And
yes, and that's how I first became acquainted with Pat Metheny. How I first had Pat and I first had contact was that another musician from Kansas City area knew that I was working on this M1DC book and said Pat was really into that band, and he went to see them twice at their height, and he describes it as one of the pivotal moments, one of a number of pivotal moments for him of shaping him as a musician. So that was our first real connection with M1DC. I mean, the number of people who were influenced by them, Bobby McFerrin, Wallace Roney was influenced by them. Wallace used to have this kind of internal debate about which was his favorite band. Was it M1DC or was it Miles' Electric Bands? And he'd go back and forth and say, well, I can't let go of Miles. Miles is too important to me. It's got to be best. But so is M1DC.
The unsung hero of both bands, Wandishi and the Electric Miles, is Benny Maupin and the bass clarinet.
Yeah, and he's the unsung hero of Bitches Brew also.
That's what I meant, particularly on Spanish Key.
Spanish Key, and also Pharaoh's Dance, where you hear rumbling underneath the da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. So this rumbling bass clarinet under there, and somehow if you remove that from the recording, it's a different recording.
It's not dark.
But he's definitely the group. Not in the same kind of way. Yeah. That's right. That's really true. And Benny's really fascinating. He's a great example of musicians who learned from everybody. He studied with, I think it was a clarinetist or flutist in the Detroit Symphony. Speaking of big ears, that's really Benny as well. But it's hard to isolate out who's the big hero of the M1 band. That's my favorite Buster Williams playing there, although I have so many favorite Buster Williams playing. Billy Hart and Eddie Henderson did a session with me and with bassist Christopher Dean Sullivan we called Infinite Spirit, and we went back to a lot of that repertoire. We recorded it in 2015 and then came out in 2016 also on FMR, like my number of my albums, but like the new one of Pat's music. So what I want to say about Billy Hart, he is really he's composing the whole band at the drums. He'll say that the M1 band was kind of intuitively and psychically being directed by Herbie. He'll make a strong case for it, and it makes a lot of sense. But when I listen to Billy Hart playing in there, I'm gasping for air so much of the time. And I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. I mean, I've talked to him a lot, and he knows more history. He knows more about drumming, although Wallace Roney also, could tell you. Wallace could listen to a drummer and say, the left finger is right hand. That's definitely Tony, and there's Blakey on the high. He would like take things apart like that. So we went to do a rehearsal with Billy. So it was just three of us. Eddie Henderson wasn't joining that rehearsal. Eddie came to the recording session, and so it was all completely new to him. He really didn't know what I had in mind. Didn't know that I had recorded electronic tracks that had pre-composed that were going to be running the same time as we were playing, and they had to attend to that too. So at the rehearsal with Billy, I was terrified within about 2 minutes because Billy seemed to be changing what he was doing seemingly every 20 seconds. And I was thinking to myself, I'm never going to keep up with this, and isn't this my session? Turned out it was Eddie's session, because when Eddie showed up and started playing, it changed everything. It's like, here's this amazing melodic player. I had to rethink what I had in mind for the session, except for the pre-recorded tracks and some of the ways I laid out the charts. But what turned out was that Billy doesn't change what he's doing every 20 seconds. He was just trying things out to see what could work for him now at that session, not back in the 1970s, not in another session, not with other musicians, and he was listening to, I was watching his face as the electronic recording was playing, and he's just the level of his curiosity and interest in discovering, but also like just in the back of his mind, knowing so much. He's the best. If you ever want to have a conversation with a musician about music history, you name anything, and he'll have something fascinating and wise to say about it, and thought-provoking more than anything. He's just the best. Yeah. So what was the real glue, or what drove that band? Gee, I don't know. And then there's Herbie, who just had these surprising moments constantly. It's Herbie's 20 seconds where things shift a little bit that makes his concerts worth every penny. It's not the whole thing. It's like these instances where, oh my God, look at I wish I could hear that again, but I'm never going to because it's a one-time event and it passed and I'm missing what's happening now. But that was so interesting. That moment. And Billy does that too.
It's very, very cool. Great stories. And that was such an important time, I think, for all music. Very, very
Yes.
Exploratory. It's funny you mentioned the moment thing, because I just finished reading Philip Glass's memoir, and that as well.
I didn't know that he was there for that. I mean, I wasn't there for that, so I only know secondhand about this.
There's a great
albeit from
documentary on Moog,
which I haven't seen. I think the first Moog that I encountered was in 1974, Mini Moog, and then when I transferred colleges, it was to SUNY Albany, and there was Joel Chatterby's SEMS system, which was like built by Moog. It was a whole wall of modules, and it was clocks running clocks, and it was an early interactive system. So, but it was a Moog's design following Joel's Joel was looking for at that early stage, but was aesthetically completely different than just about anybody else.
It looked like the same
Yeah,
system that, what was it, that Schaefer beer commercial?
I don't remember.
Oh God, I forget the guy's name. I did some jingles for him actually. He did an entire na 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 na, having more than one, and it was with this giant. It was fantastic. It really was. My first synth was a Putney VCS3.
Oh, I had one of those the same time. I didn't, and not personally. The studio at Potsdam had the Moog, had the VCS3, which I first heard with King Crimson.
Right.
When
Jamie Muir.
No, before that, Pete Sinfield had the VCS3 and was taking audio input from, forget his first name, Wallace, the drummer.
Ian Wallace, yeah.
Ian Wallace, and never heard anything like that before. But yeah, and then one of the first Buchla systems that had some digital components to it was also in that studio that I first worked in.
The Pin Matrix. My sister, when she was in Mills College, used Buchla.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Tom.
Pick a topic, I'll talk about it.
Well, I want to try.
You want to bet to Pat. Right?
Well, I want to help you sell books.
Very interesting, but stupid.
But no, this is going to be a fascinating 2 episode thing. Just cherry picking some of the things that struck me. You talk about watercolors in 77 and the Pat Metheny group was 78, and that the acoustic guitar was not a sonic element usually associated with jazz, and that's kind of what separated Pat from everyone else. And to me, that goes back to your mom. What is it? That whole thing, how different Pat was. And then interesting quote from Pat in 1976 was he felt that the guitar had yet to really make its way into the jazz scene. And I guess at that time, you can refresh my memory, I guess it was the Ray Gomez, McLaughlin era. So they were coming from more of a rock perspective, whereas Pat really swung when he played.
Well, he came up playing everything. He played with, as a teenager, he was playing in Kansas City. He was playing. It wasn't the Kansas City scene of great fame, of the scene of yore, but it was a new scene, and it was really a learning lab for the whole vocabulary of bebop, but also the ability to play anything you got to play, like in a hotel bar.
Yeah, interesting. And then you say he admired Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall, and Jimi Hendrix, and even Eddie Van Halen, because they're playing transcended guitarness of it all. And an interesting perspective. I think of those artists, I think of the Almighty Song. I mean, even though they were guitar gods, their guitar playing never overshadowed the song they were playing in a pop context.
Yeah, I think that's, and that's where Pat's going. The fact that he's playing the guitar is the fact that he grew up in a family of trumpeters and horn players, started playing French horn. It wasn't his thing. And, he lived in an area where there were acoustic guitars all over the place. And he discovered the guitar and he loved it and it became his thing. So it was his instrument. And he listened to every significant guitarist. I think that Wes Montgomery was interesting to him. For one thing, Wes played in an unconventional kind of way. He was playing with his thumb, no pick. Wes was interested in sounds. Wes could get all different subtleties of tone by virtue of how he played. He was the consummate melodic player. You could follow, there's a logic in his soloing that you can follow, not because you're a musician or can analyze it in some way, but because it moves you in a certain way. Just go somewhere. And most people only know the Wes of the CTI recordings, but there's a whole prehistory to that. So there was like an emotional depth to Wes as well as his technique that struck Pat. And I think that, I don't know, if Wes wasn't a guitarist but played the same in some kind of alternate universe, played in a way that's analogous on some other thing, would that have grabbed him? Yeah, I bet it would have. But as a young teenager, there's Wes, and he's playing a guitar, and so guitarists became interesting to him.
You also compare Pat as a band leader to Duke Ellington, being a leader, composer, and performer, and that's an interesting analogy.
Yeah, I think that Pat thinks of himself in that way, and I know that he's aware that sounds like a grandiose statement for anybody to say, "Hi, I'm running for state assembly. Just call me Honest Abe." It's like, really? Come on, like, get a life. Don't try that. So Pat's really aware of the stakes in drawing that analogy, but the analogy, I think, works in the sense that he's the soloist, he's often the composer, he's often the arranger, not always. He's somebody else who occasionally does the composing, who does some of the arranging. That's Lyle Mays. And he's the boss on the bandstand, and not like there isn't a manager. So you have to sort of, being all three, it's your music being played by your band, and you're choosing people who are not going to be clones of yourself, but are going to be interesting. Before he went on the solo touring the last few years, before that, he had his side-eye trio, which was a rotating group of mostly younger musicians. And the whole idea was, well, let's hire some people who grew up on my music, have different aesthetics, have something to say about the music. Let's hear what they have to say. How will it influence me? What can I learn from them on the bandstand playing my music, listening to them? Which is the opposite of saying, well, I'm Duke Ellington. It's a really incredibly humble statement. And then to get along with these young guys, and that's a whole that there's an art to that as well. So, but you're the boss. So they work for you also at the same time. So the relationships are really, in both cases, are really complicated. Keith Jarrett's trio of the 80s and 90s and 2000s, three pianists, three of the most important, most traveled musicians in recorded human history. And you're going to call this Keith's band. Well, it is and it isn't. I don't know. Have you interviewed Jack DeJohnette?
That's another
absolute. That's another, Billy Hart, Jack DeJohnette, those are absolute musts. And if you do, ask him about that band.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of
There's a lot to say.
You talk about his relationship with Lyle Mays. Interesting that he wanted to do the Lennon and McCartney thing with Lyle Mays. And his reflections on Lyle Mays, Pat compares him to Joe Zawinul in terms of keyboards, the advancement of the art form.
Yeah, they're obviously really, really different players.
Yeah.
And they come out of different places and different generations. But I think what he really means is that they're both thinking orchestrally. They're thinking in terms of the breadth of their sonic palette. They're thinking as arrangers, including while they're playing. That's the Billy Hart, the description I was giving of Billy Hart also. He's composing all the time while listening all the time. And with Pat and Lyle, I remember the first concert I went to, and I wasn't sure whose band it was for a moment there. I realized quickly it was Pat's. It was billed as Pat's. But the level of musical empathy, I guess, between them was so high. And so and part of that was sharing certain sensibilities. Part of that was they're really coming of age together. They're both Midwesterns, as was Gary Burton. I think I said what I wanted to say about that.
I'm thinking one of the things that always struck me about Pat is during his ECM period, it almost sounded like he was European.
Yeah, which he's not. He's really not. But if you listen to Billy Hart's quartet on the ECM recordings, at least the first two, partly because of the way they mix the drums and the ambience of them. For a minute there, you might think that they're European bands. Well, go see them sometime. That ain't no European band. Keith Jarrett, you listen to his American band, reminds you that he's not a European either. And Pat's not. Pat's a Midwesterner who's lived all over the place, including Brazil, has lived for years in New York State, including the city, more years than he lived in a suburb of Kansas City. Like I said, I'm from Queens. I left Queens when I was 12, but I think like I'm from Queens. People ask me to tell my story. It's about Queens. Sensibilities are Queens. The Mets can do no wrong even when they're completely terrible, which has been most of my life. Yeah.
All right, David, that was part 2 of Bob Gluck. David, what can we expect on the playlist?
It is so odd, now that I'm looking at the playlist, of how divergent and digressive the Notes from an Artist podcast really is. Because if you look really carefully, which every now and then I do, because I have to edit these things, I see, my God, what an interesting set list created for your enjoyment. So we have some Pat Metheny. Actually, we only have 2 tracks of Pat Metheny because we have some Lionel Mays with Pat Metheny, Gary Burton with Pat Metheny, Herbie Hancock, John Zorn with Pat Metheny, Charlie Hayden with Pat Metheny, Mark Johnson with Pat Metheny, Wes Montgomery without Pat Metheny, and Miles Davis also sans Pat Metheny. But it's a really cool set list, so I hope you enjoy it.
All right, Bob Gluck, Volume 2. We'll stay tuned.
I know
for
you're
Volume
shocked.
3. I'm shocked, David. I'm in a state of shock. Anyway, my name is Tom Semioli. Your name is?
David C. Gross, and we hope you see us again soon.
All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for potting.
Look at this. The coffee is piping hot. The toast is buttered. The eggs are precisely right. But sometimes it takes more than that to thaw out a husband. It takes special attention to personal details, like taking more effective care of your breath. Why count on toothpaste alone? The most common cause of bad breath is germs in the mouth. No toothpaste is antiseptic. So no toothpaste kills germs the way Listerine antiseptic does, instantly, by millions. That's why Listerine stops bad breath 4 times better than any toothpaste. Listerine antiseptic stops bad breath 4 times better than any toothpaste. What a difference.
You gotta fucking be kidding me! How dare you call yourselves professional?
Through unforeseen circumstances, this show will remain on the air until further notice.